I watched my mother's face turn white as she stared at the television screen, her coffee cup frozen halfway to her lips. On the screen, I stood in an elegant navy gown, accepting the Presidential Medal of Excellence from the president himself, while my father sat rigid in his leather chair, the remote control slipping from his hand. That's Emma, my mother whispered. They had no idea I'd even been nominated. The news anchor's voice filled their pristine living room. 23-year-old Emma Chen has become the youngest recipient of the Presidential Medal of Excellence for her groundbreaking work in sustainable energy technology. Her revolutionary solar panel design is projected to reduce global carbon emissions by 15% within the next decade. I wasn't there to see their faces in person. I was 300 miles away at the after-party in the White House, sipping champagne and laughing with senators and CEOs. But I'd installed cameras in their house 6 months ago, a precaution from my previous life, and I was watching their reaction on my phone between conversations with venture capitalists who wanted to fund my next project. My brother's voice cut through their shock. Wait, Emma? Our Emma? That's impossible. She dropped out of college. She's working at some fast food place, isn't she? If only they knew. If only they remembered that in my first life, I died at 25 in that fast food place, collapsed behind the fryer during a double shift, my heart giving out from exhaustion and malnutrition while they celebrated my brother's mediocre acceptance into a state school. But they didn't know, they couldn't know, because this time, everything was different. This time, I'd been given a second chance. The memories of my death still haunted me, even now. I remembered the fluorescent lights of the restaurant kitchen, the smell of hot oil, the crushing pain in my chest. I remembered thinking, as darkness closed in, that maybe someone would finally notice me if I died. Maybe they'd finally see what they'd done. I'd been 25 years old, working 70 hours a week across 3 jobs, living in a basement apartment with black mold on the walls because it was all I could afford. My phone had 17 missed calls from debt collectors. My stomach had been empty for 2 days because I'd sent my last paycheck to my parents. They'd needed it for my brother Daniel's networking trip to Europe. I remembered dying alone on that greasy floor and thinking, this is what I get for loving them. Then I'd woken up, 16 years old again, lying in my childhood bed the morning of my SATs, the same bed I'd slept in the first time, in the smallest room of our 4-bedroom house, the room that had been meant for storage until I came along, an unplanned accident that interrupted my parents' perfect life with their golden child. At first, I'd thought it was a dream, but the memories were too vivid, too real. I knew things I couldn't possibly know, the exact questions that would be on the SAT, the lottery numbers from next week, the stocks that would explode in value. Most importantly, I knew exactly what my family would do to me if I let them. That first morning of my second life, I'd laid in bed and cried. Not from joy at getting another chance, but from the crushing realization that I had to live through it all again. The neglect, the casual cruelty, the 1,000 tiny ways they made me feel invisible, worthless, less than human. But then I'd dried my tears and made a decision. This time would be different. This time, I would use every advantage I had. This time, I wouldn't beg for their love. This time, I would make them see exactly what they'd thrown away. The abuse had started small, so small that for years I'd convinced myself it wasn't really abuse at all. It was just that Daniel needed more attention. Daniel was special. Daniel was going to do great things. I was born when my mother was 41, an accident she never let me forget. Daniel was 8 years older, already the center of their universe. My father was a successful corporate lawyer, my mother a former model who'd given up her career to raise her miracle baby after years of infertility treatments. Then I came along. "We weren't planning on you," my mother told me when I was 7, saying it like it was just a fact, not a knife to a child's heart. We'd finally gotten Daniel into the gifted program. We had our lives figured out. And then, well, here you are. Here I was, the unwanted addition, the drain on resources meant for Daniel's future. My childhood was a masterclass in benign neglect. While Daniel got piano lessons, math tutors, and summer camps at prestigious universities, I got library books and silence. While they attended every one of Daniel's soccer games, they forgot my school plays, my art shows, my award ceremonies for honor roll. Emma's so self sufficient, my mother would tell her friends, like it was a compliment and not a damning indictment of her parenting. She never asks for anything. Not like Daniel. He's so passionate, so driven. He needs so much support. What she meant was, Emma has learned not to ask because we'll say no anyway. I learned to be invisible. I learned to take up as little space as possible. I learned that my needs were always secondary to Daniel's wants. When I was 12, I'd saved my birthday money for months to buy a new bike. My old one was rusted and too small. The day I'd finally saved enough, my father took the money from my room. Daniel needs a new laptop for his AP classes, he'd explained, not asking, just informing me. You understand, don't you, Emma? His education is important. You can get a bike anytime. I never got that bike. I never got anything that wasn't a hand-me-down or an afterthought. When I was 14, I'd won a regional science fair with a project on water purification. First place, a scholarship to a summer STEM camp. I'd been so proud, so excited. I'd run home with the trophy, burst through the door, and found my parents throwing a party for Daniel because he'd gotten a B+ on his English essay, up from a B-. That's nice, Emma, my mother had said absently when I'd shown her the trophy. Put it somewhere safe, Daniel. Come here. Everyone wants to hear about your essay. The trophy had ended up in a box in the garage. The scholarship had gone unused because my parents couldn't afford to take time off work to drive me. But they'd taken Daniel to Europe that summer. For culture, they'd said. The worst part wasn't the neglect, though. It was the gaslighting. Whenever I'd tried to tell them how I felt, they'd made me feel crazy. You're so sensitive, Emma. You're imagining things. We love you just as much as Daniel. We just show it differently. You're being dramatic. We're good parents. Look at this house. Look at your school. Look at everything we provide. They provided shelter and food, barely. They provided the absolute minimum required to avoid social services. But love, attention, support, those were reserved for Daniel. By the time I was 16, the first time around, I'd learned not to expect anything. I'd learned to make myself small. I'd learned that my role in the family was to be easy, convenient, and invisible. I'd gotten a full scholarship to a good university. Not Harvard, where Daniel was going, on my parents' dime, of course, because his grades weren't quite scholarship material. But a solid state school. I'd been proud. I'd thought finally I could escape. But my mother had sat me down the night I got my acceptance letter. Emma, honey, we need to talk about your father's retirement fund. I'd had a bad feeling immediately. Your father made some unfortunate investments. And with Daniel's tuition at Harvard and his living expenses in Cambridge, well, we're a bit stretched. We'll need you to contribute to the household. Contribute? I'd asked. But I have that scholarship. I can finally... We need you to stay home and get a job, just for a year or two. Help us get back on our feet. You understand, don't you? Family helps family. I'd gone to my father, desperate. He'd looked at me with those cold eyes and said, Don't be selfish, Emma. This family has sacrificed for you your whole life. Now it's your turn. Sacrificed for me? But I'd done it. Because I'd been trained my whole life to put their needs first. I'd deferred my enrollment, gotten a job at a call center, handed over my paychecks. Just for a year, they'd said. That year had turned into 2, then 3. By the time I was 21, my scholarship had expired. I was working 2 jobs. Daniel had graduated Harvard and was working at a startup, living in the apartment my parents helped him buy. I was living in a room in a stranger's house, eating ramen for dinner, taking the bus 2 hours each way to work. When are you going back to school? My aunt had asked me once at Thanksgiving. My mother had laughed. Oh, Emma's not really the academic type. She's more practical. Not everyone needs a degree, right, Emma? You're happy with your life. I hadn't been happy. I'd been dying inside. But I'd smiled and nodded because that's what I'd always done. At 23, I'd finally saved enough to enroll in community college. Night classes while working full-time. It had been brutal, but it had been something. Some hope for a future that didn't involve phone calls and minimum wage. Then, my father had been diagnosed with a condition that required an expensive surgery not fully covered by insurance. And guess who they'd called? Emma, we need $50,000. I'd had $12,000 in savings, my tuition fund, my escape fund. Dad, I don't have. What do you mean you don't have it? You've been working for years. What have you been doing with your money? Being irresponsible? Irresponsible. Me. After years of 70-hour weeks of living in poverty, of giving them everything. I'd taken out loans, credit cards, predatory payday lenders. I'd given them everything. Again, my father had gotten his surgery. I'd dropped out of community college and picked up a third job at a fast food restaurant. That's where I died. 25 years old, exhausted, broke, alone. My last thought had been wondering if they'd even come to my funeral, or if Daniel's schedule would be too busy. But now I was 16 again, lying in my bed on SAT morning, and I knew everything. I knew every test answer. I knew which stocks would skyrocket. I knew exactly how to play this game. More importantly, I knew that my family would never change, that no amount of achievement, no amount of sacrifice would ever make them see me as valuable, that I'd been pouring love into a black hole my entire life. This time, I would be smart. This time, I would be strategic. This time, I would make them regret every moment they chose to ignore me. I got out of bed, got dressed, and went to take my SATs. I aced them, of course. I'd taken them before, plus I remembered most of the questions. Perfect score. The guidance counselor called me into her office 2 weeks later, stunned. Emma, this is incredible. With these scores, you could go anywhere. Harvard, MIT, Stanford. I'm thinking MIT, I'd said, because I knew that's where the connections were for what I needed to do. At dinner that night, I'd announced my score. My father had looked up from his phone. That's nice, Emma. Daniel got a 1520. Very good for him. I got a 1600, I'd said clearly. Perfect score. Silence. My mother had frowned. A perfect score? Are you sure? They must have made a mistake. You should have them recheck it. There's no mistake. Well, my father had said, returning to his phone, don't let it go to your head. The SAT isn't everything. It's what you do with it that matters. Daniel's extracurriculars are what really made him stand out. Daniel, who was sitting across from me, had the grace to look uncomfortable. That's really good, Emma. Congratulations. I'd smiled at him. Sweet, poisonous. Thank you, Daniel. I'm sure your 1520 will get you into a great state school. The thing about my brother was that he wasn't a bad person, not like my parents. He was just weak. He'd benefited from their favoritism his entire life and never once questioned it. He'd accepted the money, the attention, the opportunities, and convinced himself he deserved them more than I did. I didn't hate Daniel, but I didn't love him either, not anymore. He'd had 1,000 chances to stand up for me, to notice what was happening, to help. He'd chosen comfort every single time. Over the next few months, I began my preparations. I applied to MIT, Stanford, and Harvard, full scholarship applications, emphasizing my background of economic hardship and self-motivated achievement despite lack of family support. I worded everything carefully, truthfully, painting a picture of a brilliant girl who'd succeeded despite, not because of her family. I got into all three with full rides. I chose MIT. My parents had barely reacted when I told them. My mother had pursed her lips. Well, I hope you're not expecting us to help with expenses. We've already done so much for Daniel's education. I don't need your help, I'd said. It's a full scholarship, room, board, everything. I won't cost you a penny. Good, my father had said, because we couldn't afford it anyway. Daniel's startup needs another round of investment, and we're going to help him. Daniel's startup, the one that would fail spectacularly within 18 months, taking my parents' retirement fund with it. I knew because I'd watched it happen the first time. This time, I said nothing. I just smiled. That sounds like a great investment, Dad. I'd also started making my own investments. I'd withdrawn the $3,000 I'd saved from birthday gifts and odd jobs over the years. Money my parents didn't know I had, kept in a secret bank account my grandmother had helped me open before she died. I'd taken that money and invested in cryptocurrency, carefully, the specific coins I knew would explode. By the time I left for MIT 3 months later, that $3,000 had become $50,000. I'd also applied for every scholarship, grant, and competition I could find. My bedroom became a command center for my future. I won essay contests, I won science competitions, I won local awards. Small amounts, 100 here, 500 there, but they added up. My parents never noticed. They were too busy with Daniel's startup launch party. The day I left for MIT, my mother hugged me stiffly at the door. "Try not to get too homesick," she'd said. "And remember, we can't afford to fly you back for holidays if you don't save up for it yourself." "I'll remember," I'd said. I'd never been back, not once. Not for Thanksgiving, not for Christmas, not for spring break. I told them I'd gotten research positions, internships, opportunities that were too good to pass up. They'd never asked for details. They'd never visited. They'd never even asked why their daughter hadn't come home in 4 years, because they didn't care. They never had. At MIT, I thrived. I'd studied mechanical engineering the first time around in my abbreviated community college stint, so I knew the basics. This time, I went further, deeper. I took advanced courses in sustainable energy, in solar panel technology, in materials science. I remembered everything from my previous life and built on it. More importantly, I used my foreknowledge to make connections. I knew which professors would become influential. I knew which companies would explode in value. I knew which research projects would lead to breakthroughs. I became a teaching assistant for Professor Morrison, who would go on to win the Nobel Prize in 3 years. I joined a research group studying photovoltaic cells, where I independently came up with innovations I'd read about in scientific journals in my previous life. Innovations that wouldn't be discovered for another decade. By my sophomore year, I had 3 patents pending, all filed under my name alone. By my junior year, I had started my own company with venture capital funding I'd secured by knowing exactly which investors would be interested in clean energy. The key innovation, my revolutionary solar panel design, was actually something I'd read about in a 2029 scientific paper in my previous life. The original inventors had struggled for years to figure out the manufacturing process. I already knew it. I'd studied their papers, their interviews, their hindsight reflections on what they should have done differently. I did it right the first time. My company, Chentech Solutions, was valued at $50 million by the time I was 21. By the time I was 23, we'd closed deals with 3 major utility companies and 2 governments. The solar panels we were producing were 40% more efficient than anything else on the market and 30% cheaper to manufacture. The media started paying attention. Forbes did a profile. TechCrunch called me the Wunderkind of sustainable energy. Time magazine named me one of their 30 under 30. Through it all, I never called my parents. I never sent them articles about my success. I never invited them to visit. When they called, rarely, usually when they needed something, I was polite but distant. "How's school?" my mother would ask. "Fine. Are you passing your classes?" "Yes." "Good. Listen, Daniel's startup is having some cash flow issues, and we were wondering if you might have some savings you could loan us." "I'm sorry, I don't. Student loans, very expensive." Click. They had no idea. They thought I was still a struggling student, probably working some part-time job to make ends meet. Definitely not successful enough to matter. They never Googled my name. They never checked my social media. They never read the news articles that mentioned me. Why would they? I was just Emma. Convenient, invisible Emma. I watched from afar as their lives fell apart. Daniel's startup failed exactly when I knew it would. My parents lost their investment, $200,000 of their retirement fund. My father had to delay his retirement. They had to sell their vacation home. I felt nothing. Or maybe I felt something like satisfaction. When my mother called to tell me about Daniel's failure, her voice tight with stress, I said, "That's too bad. I'm sorry to hear that. We might need to borrow some money, Emma, just until we get back on our feet. Do you think you could—" "I'm afraid I can't help, Mom. Student loans are really crushing me right now. I'm barely getting by, you understand?" The irony was delicious. The same words they'd used on me, over and over, now coming from my mouth. "But surely you could—" "I really can't. I have to go. I have class." I hung up. She didn't call back. The Presidential Medal of Excellence nomination came when I was 23. It was one of the highest civilian honors in the country, given to individuals who'd made extraordinary contributions to American society. The nomination letter arrived at my office, a corner suite in a downtown Boston high-rise, light years away from that fast food kitchen where I died in my first life. I sat at my desk holding the letter and felt a moment of pure, crystalline triumph. This was it. This was the moment I'd been building toward for 7 years. The ultimate, undeniable proof that I was someone who mattered, someone who'd achieved something extraordinary, someone who was worth noticing. The ceremony would be in 3 months at the White House, black tie, televised. It would be the biggest news story of the week. The youngest person ever to receive this honor, the girl genius who was going to save the planet. I could have called my parents. In another life, maybe a version of me who was still seeking their approval would have said, "Mom, Dad, you'll never believe this. I've been nominated for the Presidential Medal of Excellence. Will you come to the ceremony? Will you finally see me?" But I wasn't that Emma anymore. That Emma had died on a fast food kitchen floor, unloved and alone. This Emma knew better. I made a decision, cold and calculated. I wouldn't tell them. I would let them find out the same way the rest of the country would find out, on the news. I would let them sit in their living room, in the house where they'd ignored me for 18 years and watch their daughter receive one of the highest honors in the nation. I would let them realize exactly what they'd thrown away. The next 3 months were a whirlwind of preparation. Interviews with major news outlets, meetings with the White House staff, fittings for the custom gown I'd have made. Navy silk, elegant and professional, with a subtle nod to MIT's colors. I hired a stylist. I practiced my speech. I made sure every detail was perfect. I invited people who mattered, Professor Morrison, who'd mentored me, my roommate from freshman year who'd been there when I had no one else, the venture capitalists who'd believed in my vision, my employees, 50 brilliant people who'd helped build Chentech into something world-changing, and I did not invite my family. 2 weeks before the ceremony, my mother called. It was the first time I'd heard from her in 6 months. "Emma, honey, how are you?" "I'm well, busy." That's good, that's good. Listen, I was calling because, well, we haven't seen you in years, and your father and I were thinking maybe you could come home for a visit. It's been so long." I knew why she was calling. Daniel had finally moved back home after his startup failure, and they needed money. They needed their backup daughter, the one who'd always given them everything when they asked. "I'm afraid I can't. I have something important coming up." What could be more important than family? Her voice had that edge to it, the guilt trip tone I knew so well. "Work." "Still in school then?" "You know, Emma, at some point you need to think about your future. You can't be a student forever. Have you thought about getting a real job? Daniel's looking for work too. Maybe you two could help each other." I almost laughed. Daniel, who'd had every advantage, who'd gone to Harvard on their dime, who'd been handed opportunities I had to fight for, was looking for work. And they wanted me, who they thought was still a struggling student, to help him. "I really have to go, Mom. I'll talk to you later." "Wait, Emma, if you have any money saved, even a little bit, we're in a really tight spot right now. Your father's retirement." I hung up. My phone rang again. I let it go to voicemail. Then I blocked the number. I didn't need them. I'd never needed them. And in 2 weeks, they would know it. The day of the ceremony arrived. I stood in front of the mirror in my hotel room at the Hay Adams, looking at myself in that navy gown. My hair was styled in a sleek updo. My makeup was flawless, professional. I looked powerful, successful, important. I looked like everything they'd told me I'd never be. My phone buzzed, a text from Professor Morrison. "Ready to make history?" I smiled. "Born ready." The ceremony was at 7 p.m. I arrived at the White House at 6, went through security, was briefed one final time by the protocol officer. The East Room was set up with rows of chairs facing a stage draped in American flags. Cameras everywhere. The major networks were covering it live. I'd made sure of one thing. I'd contacted the major news networks myself and given them a particular angle for their coverage. The young woman who succeeded despite impossible odds, the daughter of a working-class family who never supported her dreams, who achieved greatness through sheer determination and brilliance. It wasn't an angle I had to exaggerate, it was just the truth, finally told. At 6:45, I took my seat in the front row. The room began to fill. Senators, diplomats, other Medal of Excellence recipients, the press pool. I saw a reporter from the New York Times I'd given an exclusive interview to, who'd be publishing a profile tomorrow morning titled The Girl They Overlooked, Emma Chen's Journey from Family Disappointment to Presidential Honor. At 7 p.m. exactly, the president was announced. We all stood. The ceremony began. There were 3 other recipients that night: a military general, a civil rights lawyer, and a doctor who'd pioneered a new cancer treatment. Each of them was called up, their achievements read aloud, their medals presented. Then it was my turn. Our final recipient tonight is the youngest person ever to receive the Presidential Medal of Excellence, the president said, looking down at his notes. Emma Chen is only 23 years old, but her contributions to sustainable energy technology are already changing the world. Her revolutionary solar panel design is projected to reduce global carbon emissions by 15% within the next decade, potentially preventing catastrophic climate change. She holds 17 patents, runs a company valued at over $300 million, and has committed to making her technology accessible to developing nations at cost. He looked up, found me in the audience, smiled. Emma Chen is proof that talent and determination can overcome any obstacle. Despite receiving no family financial support, no legacy advantages, and no head start in life, she has achieved what many would consider impossible. She is a testament to the American dream, that anyone, regardless of their background, can achieve greatness through hard work and innovation. I stood and walked to the stage, my heels clicking on the marble floor. Every camera in the room was pointed at me. Millions of people were watching live on TV, including, I knew, my parents. I'd had the cameras installed in their house, check the timing. At 7:14 p.m., they'd be settling in to watch the local news, which would cut to the live broadcast right about now. The president placed the medal around my neck. Heavy, significant. I shook his hand, posed for photos. Then I stepped up to the microphone to give my speech. I'd written it carefully, every word chosen for maximum impact. Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to everyone here tonight. This honor is beyond anything I could have imagined when I was 16 years old, studying for my SATs in a house where no one believed I'd amount to anything. I saw a few surprised looks in the audience. This wasn't the usual humble, generic acceptance speech. I didn't grow up with advantages. I grew up in a family where my achievements were dismissed, where my dreams were discouraged, where I was told repeatedly that I wasn't worth investing in, where my full scholarship acceptance to MIT was met not with celebration, but with indifference, where my parents asked me to drop out of school to support my older brother's failing business ventures. The room was silent now. Everyone was listening. But I learned something important from that experience. I learned that your family's belief in you, while valuable, is not necessary for success. I learned that the people who dismiss you, who overlook you, who tell you that you're not good enough, they're wrong. Not because they're bad people necessarily, but because they can't see beyond their own limited vision. I paused, looked directly into the camera. I knew that somewhere, 300 miles away, my parents were watching. Maybe Daniel, too. I succeeded not because of my family, but despite them. And while that's not the story anyone wants to hear, we all want to believe that families are supportive, that parents want the best for their children. It's the truth. Some of us have to build our own support systems. Some of us have to become our own champions. Another pause. Let it sink in. So this medal is for everyone who's ever been told they're not good enough. Everyone who's ever been overlooked, underestimated, dismissed. Everyone who's ever had to fight twice as hard for half the recognition. You are good enough. You are more than good enough. And the people who couldn't see your worth, that's their loss, not yours. I stepped back from the microphone. The room erupted in applause. I saw several people wiping their eyes. The president leaned in and whispered, "Powerful speech, Emma. Thank you for your honesty." I smiled. "Thank you for this honor, Mr. President." The ceremony ended 30 minutes later. I was immediately swarmed by reporters wanting follow-up interviews, by senators wanting to discuss policy, by CEOs wanting to discuss partnerships. I handled them all with grace and professionalism. The girl who'd grown up invisible now commanding every room she entered. Through it all, my phone was buzzing in my purse. I ignored it. At 10 p.m., after the official reception ended, I finally checked my messages. 17 missed calls from my mother, 12 from my father, 6 from Daniel, and texts. So many texts. From my mother. Emma, we saw you on TV. We had no idea. Why didn't you tell us? We would have been there. We're so proud of you. Please call us. From my father. I don't understand. When did this happen? Why didn't you tell us about any of this? We need to talk. From Daniel. Emma, holy shit. I just saw the news. You own a company? You met the president? Why didn't you tell us what you were doing? Mom and Dad are freaking out. Please call. I felt nothing. Or maybe I felt a distant, cold satisfaction. I typed out a single message and sent it to all three of them. Thank you for your messages. I'm quite busy this week with media appearances and business meetings. I'll try to call when I have time. I never called. The media storm that followed the ceremony was everything I'd hoped for and more. The New York Times profile went viral. The girl they overlooked became a national conversation about family dynamics, about favoritism, about the children who are ignored and dismissed and expected to just accept it. Other outlets picked up the story. CNN did a segment, NPR did an interview, People magazine did a feature. Everyone wanted to know about the young woman who'd succeeded despite her family's lack of support, who'd achieved greatness while being told she was nothing. I gave carefully controlled interviews, never quite naming my parents directly, but making it clear what had happened. I talked about being the unplanned child, about watching resources go to my older brother while I went without, about being told to defer my education to support the family financially, about years of being invisible in my own home. The public response was overwhelming. I got thousands of messages from people with similar stories, thanking me for speaking out. I also got messages from child psychologists and family therapists praising me for highlighting a form of abuse that often goes unacknowledged. Benign neglect, favoritism, the 1,000 tiny ways families can damage a child without ever raising a hand. Some people criticized me, said I was ungrateful, that I was airing dirty laundry, that family was everything. I didn't care. Let them think what they wanted. I knew the truth. My parents' names started appearing in online forums. People had figured out who they were. It wasn't hard with my last name in my hometown. They were getting recognized, getting confronted by strangers who'd seen the news coverage. My mother called again. I let it go to voicemail. Emma, please. People are saying terrible things about us online. They're calling us at work. Neighbors are asking questions. We need to talk about this. We need to explain our side of things. This isn't fair. We did our best. We always provided for you. You can't do this to us. You're destroying our reputation. Please, Emma, please call us back. I deleted the voicemail without finishing it. Daniel texted, Emma, Mom is having panic attacks. Dad is talking about suing you for defamation. This is getting out of control. Whatever happened between you guys, whatever you're angry about, we need to fix this. We're family. I replied, if Dad wants to sue me, tell him to have his lawyer call my lawyer. I have 17 of them. And Daniel, we're related by blood. That doesn't make us family. Family shows up. Family cares. Family notices when you're dying inside. You did none of those things. He didn't text back. The companies I'd been negotiating with suddenly became much more interested. My company's valuation jumped to $500 million. I got offers from 3 major venture capital firms wanting to invest. I got calls from the UN about implementing my solar panels in developing nations. I was on the Forbes 30 Under 30 list, then the Forbes 400. At 23 years old, I was officially a billionaire. Every article mentioned how I'd done it alone, how my family hadn't supported her, how she'd succeeded despite impossible odds. My parents' friends started distancing themselves. The careful social circle they'd built over decades began to crumble. Who wanted to be associated with the people who'd ignored their genius daughter? Who'd dismissed the girl who was now one of the most celebrated young minds in America? I heard through the grapevine, a mutual acquaintance who'd gone to high school with Daniel, that my mother had stopped going to her book club, that my father had been passed over for a partnership at his firm, that Daniel couldn't find a job because every time he interviewed, someone would Google his name and find articles about how his parents had favored him over his brilliant sister, and they'd see him as the beneficiary of unjust advantages. I felt a small twinge of guilt about Daniel, a small one. He'd had chances to be better. He'd chosen not to take them. 3 months after the ceremony, I did something I'd been planning since the day I'd woken up 16 again. I bought my parents' house. It wasn't difficult. They were behind on their mortgage. Daniel's failed startup had cost them more than they'd admitted, and my father's delayed retirement meant they had income problems. The bank was threatening foreclosure. I had my lawyer make them an offer through a shell company. A fair price, actually more than the house was worth. Enough to clear their debts and move somewhere smaller. They didn't know it was me. Not until after they'd signed the papers. Then my lawyer sent them a follow-up letter. Please be advised that the property at address has been purchased by Chentech Holdings, LLC, a subsidiary of Chentech Solutions. The principal owner, Emma Chen, intends to convert the property into a residential facility for young women pursuing STEM education who lack family support. I'd had my assistant email me when the letter was delivered. I'd watched on the cameras I'd never removed as my father opened the envelope, read the letter, and slowly sat down at the kitchen table. She bought our house, he'd said, his voice hollow. Emma bought our house. My mother had started crying, not delicate tears, but ugly, desperate sobs. How could she do this to us? We're her parents. How could she be so cruel? Cruel. That word. I'd thought about it a lot over the years. Was it cruel to stop giving them money when they'd never given me emotional support? Was it cruel to succeed spectacularly and not share that success with people who'd never believed in me? Was it cruel to buy their house and turn it into exactly what I'd wished for as a child? A safe place for girls like me? Or was it just justice? I decided I didn't care which one it was. I'd spent one lifetime being the good daughter, the convenient daughter, the invisible daughter. This lifetime was mine. The residential facility opened 6 months later. The Emma Chen Foundation for Overlooked Brilliance. A beautiful home where 6 young women could live rent-free while pursuing their education, all of them nominated by teachers who'd recognized their potential, even when their families hadn't. The irony of the location was not lost on anyone. The bedroom that had been Daniel's, the large, sunny room with a view of the garden, became a computer lab. The bedroom that had been my parents', the master suite with the ensuite bathroom, became a library and study space. My old room, the smallest one, the storage room, I left empty. A memorial to the girl who'd lived there, who'd been nothing and no one, who'd died at 25 and been reborn to rewrite her story. I attended the opening ceremony, cut the ribbon, gave a speech to the press about the importance of recognizing brilliance wherever it appears, regardless of family support. I didn't look at the crowd, but I knew my parents were there. Someone had told me they'd driven by, parked across the street, watching from their car. Let them watch. Let them see what their house had become. Let them see the memorial to their own failures as parents. A year after the medal ceremony, I turned 24. I celebrated by appearing on the cover of Time magazine as Person of the Year. The article was titled, "The Architect of Tomorrow: How Emma Chen is Reshaping the World." I read it in my penthouse apartment in Boston. All windows and light, the opposite of that dark basement where I died in my first life. I had a cat now, a fluffy Persian named Victory. I had friends, real friends who knew me and liked me. I had a team of people who respected my work. I had more money than I could spend in several lifetimes. I had everything except the one thing I'd wanted as a child, a family who loved me. But I'd learned that some losses weren't actually losses. Some absences were blessings. Some empty spaces were better left empty than filled with people who would only hurt you. My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Hello? Emma? My mother's voice. She sounded older, tired. Please don't hang up. I should have, but curiosity made me stay on the line. What do you want? I want... She paused. I heard her breathing, shaky. I want to apologize. For everything. Your father and we've been going to therapy, trying to understand what we did wrong. And I need you to know that we see it now. We see how badly we failed you. We see how much we hurt you. And we're so sorry. I waited, said nothing. I know it's too late, she continued. I know you'll never forgive us. But I needed to say it. You deserved so much better than we gave you. You deserve to be loved and supported and celebrated. and we couldn't see how special you were. We were so focused on Daniel, on our own fears and insecurities, that we couldn't see you at all. You're right, I said quietly. I did deserve better. I know you did. And I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that we see it now. We see you now. We're proud of you. Not because of your success, but because of who you are. Because you survived us and became this incredible person anyway. I felt something crack in my chest. Not forgiveness, not love, but maybe a recognition that they were finally seeing the truth. It's too late, I said. You can't undo 25 years of neglect with one apology. I know. You can't get back what you threw away. I know. I'm not going to let you back into my life. I'm not going to let you claim credit for my success. I'm not going to let you tell people you always believed in me, or that you're proud, or any of the things parents say when their children succeed. I understand. Good. I took a breath. But I accept your apology. Not because you deserve forgiveness, but because I deserve closure. So, thank you for calling. Goodbye, Mom. I hung up before she could respond. Then I sat there for a long time, looking out at the Boston skyline, victory purring in my lap. I thought about my first life, about that girl who died alone, believing she was worthless. I thought about how different this life had turned out, how I'd taken the knowledge of my death and turned it into a second chance at everything. I thought about my parents, growing old in some small apartment, probably still not fully understanding what they'd done. I thought about Daniel, still struggling to find his footing in a world that now saw him as the mediocre son of terrible parents. I felt nothing, or maybe I felt peace. They'd had their chance, a whole lifetime of chances. They'd chosen, over and over, to overlook me, to dismiss me, to make me small. And I'd chosen, over and over in this second life, to become impossible to overlook. I'd won. Not just success, but something more important. I'd proven to myself that I'd never needed them. That their love, which I'd craved so desperately as a child, was actually worthless because it was conditional, limited, and given only to those who fit their narrow vision of value. I'd proven that I could love myself enough to succeed without them. That was the ultimate revenge. Not making them suffer, but making myself happy. 5 years later, I was 29 years old. Chentech Solutions had expanded globally. My solar panels were on houses, businesses, and government buildings in 70 countries. We'd prevented an estimated billion tons of carbon emissions. I'd won the Nobel Prize in Physics. I'd been on every major magazine cover. I'd given TED Talks, keynoted international conferences, advised presidents and prime ministers. I'd dated, though nothing serious. My therapist? Yes. I had a therapist now, someone who specialized in family trauma, said I had trust issues. I said I had discernment. Same thing, different framing. The Emma Chen Foundation had expanded beyond that first house. We now had facilities in 20 cities, housing over 300 young women. We'd sent 47 girls to Ivy League schools, fully funded. 12 of them had already started their own companies. The success rate was extraordinary. I gave a speech at the foundation's 5th anniversary gala. 500 people in attendance, including several senators, tech CEOs, and celebrities who'd been moved by our mission. 5 years ago, I said, standing at the podium in a stunning emerald gown, I bought my childhood home and turned it into something I'd wished for my entire childhood. A place where brilliant girls would be seen, supported, and celebrated regardless of their family circumstances. Applause. Some people thought it was an act of revenge. Maybe it was. But it was also an act of love. For the girl I was and for all the girls like her. Every young woman who's lived in our facilities represents a potential future that might have been lost because no one noticed her brilliance. Because her family was too wrapped up in their own priorities to see her. More applause. Tonight, I want to announce an expansion. The Emma Chen Foundation is establishing a $50 million scholarship fund for students from unsupportive family backgrounds. We're partnering with 50 universities to identify and support students whose families have actively discouraged their education. Because every child deserves a champion, even if, especially if, that champion has to be themselves. Standing ovation, I looked out at the crowd and saw Professor Morrison, now elderly but beaming with pride. I saw my team from Chentech. I saw the girls from the foundation, all dressed up, all shining with potential. I didn't see my parents. They hadn't been invited. They'd never be invited to anything in my life ever again. But that was okay. I'd built a family of my own choosing. A family of people who saw me, supported me, celebrated me. A family that was real, not just biological accident. After the gala, I went home to my penthouse. Victory greeted me at the door, purring. I changed into comfortable clothes, made myself tea, and sat by the window. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. I saw the gala on the news. Your father and I watched it together. We're so proud of everything you've accomplished. We know we have no right to say that, but it's true. We love you, Emma. We always did. We just didn't know how to show it. Mom. I read the message 3 times. Then I deleted it. They loved me. Sure. Now. When I was famous, successful, impossible to ignore. When loving me was socially advantageous rather than socially embarrassing. But where was that love when I was 7 and needed a hug? Where was it when I was 14 and needed someone to come to my science fair? Where was it when I was 16 and needed someone to believe in me? Where was it when I was 25 and dying alone, broke and exhausted and convinced I was worthless? It was nowhere. It had never existed. This thing they called love now was just regret wearing a mask, just social pressure forcing them to acknowledge what they'd lost. I didn't need it. I didn't want it. I had built a life so beautiful, so successful, so full of meaning and purpose that their belated love was worth less than nothing. It was an insult to everything I'd achieved alone. I finished my tea and went to bed. Victory curled up beside me, warm and purring. I fell asleep satisfied, at peace, victorious. The girl who died at 25, overlooked and unloved, would have been proud of who I'd become. And that was the only opinion that mattered.